to give the basic frameworks. I used to be the CEO of MySQL. That's what I might be known for. For the last 12 months, I did first 6 months of nothing, and then for 6 months I was entrepreneur in residence with 2 VC firms, Benchmark Capital and Index Ventures. So I worked with the VC firms, helping them find startups to invest in, but I wasn't a VC myself. I made no investment decisions. I still don't understand money matters. I just understand how to build a business. But now 4 weeks ago, I jumped back into the startup world. So this is now my 8th venture in my career. So I did 6 before MySQL. MySQL was the 7th, and this is the 8th one. It's called Eucalyptus. I'm now the CEO of 18 people in Santa Barbara, and then we're expanding rapidly. So that's who I am today. I was here when was I here? Last year in October?
October, yeah.
And then we mostly spoke about the personality of the entrepreneur and how you manage yourself. And I continue to believe that the only and the best way to be successful as an entrepreneur is to understand yourself. Because we are so confused. And maybe we're confused about money and product and positioning and all of that, but even more so we're confused about our own strengths and weaknesses and how we interact. And that's why I was happy to spend time on that specific topic, because once you figure that part out, it's much easier for you to hire people, it's much easier for you to manage people, manage yourself, prepare for the changes, know whether you should get another person as the CEO or whether you shouldn't. All those very difficult questions. So to me that remains the #1 sort of internal challenge of the entrepreneur. But then today we'll talk about completely different things. So today we'll just focus on business models and the hard stuff, sort of the theoretical and practical and operational aspect of building a business. And we have an awful lot of time here available, 1.5 more hours, so it really has to be interactive. And I'll start by going through some overall things using my presentation from last week or 2 weeks ago, but then also talking generally about these things. But then you're free to interrupt me with your questions. I'm very happy to deal with specifics of some companies who are presenting here or who are here, so that we get very much out of it. Because at the end of the day, you need to build massive, massive businesses, global businesses, and take them out in the world, because there still are far too few of them coming out of Finland. And I think it's great now that we have many entrepreneurs here in Finland who aren't originally from Finland, because we need a little bit of new DNA in this country when it comes to risk-taking, entrepreneurialism, you know, what you do when you fail and what you do when you succeed. Because we live in this miserable country where it's forbidden to fail and it's forbidden to succeed. Whichever you do, you're doomed. If you stay in the middle, you're fine. Everybody loves you. But just try to be better than everybody else and you get killed immediately. And try to fail and you get pitied forever. And nobody will trust you anymore. So it's good to see the infusion of foreign DNA here, so that we can get the index up. I don't know if you saw the study about what was it called? The Entrepreneurial Risk-Taking Index or something. They measured it in 150 countries, and Finland was 5th from the end or something, together with Japan and Zimbabwe or some other places. Jamaica, yeah. So, and it's not all bad, because there are many benefits of this. There's a reason why Finland is such a stable, nice, well-behaved country, where you can pay in a restaurant by giving your business card and they'll invoice you, and you can leave your wallet on the table, and many good benefits of this. I'm not saying it's a bad form of society, I'm just saying it doesn't make it easy to be an entrepreneur. And then in addition to this, we have absolutely crazy tax laws, which make it more difficult, and we have insane labor laws, which make it difficult to get rid of people. And all people are great in some aspect, but many people join the wrong company, and they need to leave. And sometimes they need to be told to leave. But in Finland, it's very difficult to do this. There was in Talouselämä an interview with some HR director who then became something else. They interviewed him, and he said 90% of the job interviews are useless, because the candidates don't know what they should apply for, what their suitability is. Well, if that's the case, it means that many people end up in the wrong job because they had no idea what they should apply for to start with. If that's true, then companies need to have the ability to let people go. Not to be mean to them, but to be good to them. And specifically so in startups where everything changes and where the one hiring is a young student from Aaltoes University who's never made a hire him or herself, who never has been a manager, who doesn't know where the company is going, who doesn't know the business model yet. And when those things change, you have to have the ability to ask people to leave the company without it being a terrible thing and without it causing trouble. And these are all difficulties for Finnish startups. But of course, we have shown already there are successful Finnish startups, so don't let that demotivate you. Just remember that there are challenges here that you don't have in other places. But then we have benefits here that don't exist in other places. So with that, let me go in now to the specifics of making money on something that doesn't make money. And it's really a tricky topic. Because everybody loves communities and will share all the bars in the world and connect all the beers with all the software and all the coders and everything. And then at the end of the day, we think that somehow there's value created. And there's a brilliant undercurrent there, which is truly, truly valuable, which is you cannot build a business unless you delight somebody. There must be a moment of new delight that you bring to somebody for it to ever be a business. Sure, there are some businesses that don't bring delight, like maybe insurance companies or something, but high tech always is about delighting somebody with something new. So that's absolutely true. But then we at the same time run the risk of jumping into this utopia where we think that that's enough, that as long as everybody loves us, they will also give us money. But I've learned the very hard way at MySQL that love and money are two completely different things. Those people who love the MySQL product typically are the ones who don't pay for it. And those who pay for it, they may not love it. They just know it's a good product for them. So it's a difficult bridge to cross, to go from the notion of delighting somebody and doing it quickly. Because the difference you have at your age and in this time is that whatever you start must be global from day one, most of it. When I was a student in the 80s, we could start companies that were local, and there was no risk that a Google would come and outcompete us because there was no Google, there was no internet. But today, the internet will bring the innovations out to everybody immediately. So you have to be very quick at growing once you have a good thing, so that others who may have an inferior product can't win by just capturing the markets quicker. And if that's the case, then you say, oh, I must go and give out my product free of charge to everybody immediately, because otherwise I get killed out there. And that's very true. But then when you do that, how do you fund the whole thing? How do you pay your own wages while you do it? And how do you then ultimately start making money? Because a sure thing to make customers unwilling to pay you money is to start by not asking money from them. Because it's a notion of expectation setting. If you give it for free and you say, this is MySQL, it's free and open source software, use it any way you like. If you 3 years later go out to say, now we have a commercial version, people look and say, no, I got used to this not being commercial. I don't want to pay for it. And we saw it with SSH, a very successful company at the time when they had open SSH, which they gave away for free. And when they went out selling the commercial SSH, many customers said, no, that wasn't the whole idea here. The idea was to have free software that we pay nothing for. So it really can be a difficult bridge to gap and get into money making. At MySQL we did so, and when I left the company we were about 100 million in annual sales. So that's a sizable company, making money of something that was available free of charge as well. But like always when you look at the success stories, sure you should learn from them, but you and also those who were in the company should be sort of open and humble enough to realize that there were many others who tried and didn't make it. Like when we look at how successful Google is, sure, Google is enormously successful, but how many others tried? Lots of them. How many have tried in the database business and how many have succeeded? It's a really dangerous ratio. Hundreds have tried and maybe half a dozen have succeeded. And it will be the same in these new business models, whether you call them freemium models or open source models or whatever you call them, where you go in with a massive free offering and then you try to convert something into a paying customer. So this is what I was asked to talk about at Park, which is the famous Xerox Park lab, where I saw the first Ethernet cable. They still have it there in one place, and the first laptop as well. But the topic of the speech was, how do you build a successful commercial operation around a successful open source project? So specifically about open source. But I do think that these principles apply to you, even though you're not technically an open source company. If you have a community on the web, it may behave similarly. And I'm not going into any licensing details here. So FOSS stands for Free and Open Source Software. And I've always unashamedly said that the best way to serve open source is to make tons of money on and around it. And I really mean it. Those who make money on open source are capable of recruiting more open source programmers, producing more open source code. And sometimes in the open source community there's a little bit of a rift between the community and those who try to make money there. And my viewpoint has always been that the best thing for the community is that there are somebody making money who can be a sponsor, who can pay for things. And Linus Torvalds has said the same. He said Linux would never be what it is if there weren't a thriving ecosystem of commercial companies around it. So specifically on open source software, it's not a business model. So if you start an open source software company, that doesn't mean you have any business model to talk about. It's a different thing. Open source is a production method and a distribution method. But it's a little bit like using industrial robots in your manufacturing. You can still sell the goods any way you like. And open source definitely puts some restrictions on how you sell, but it doesn't tell you how to sell. So it needs a business model of its own. And it also isn't a religion. It's not charity, it's not a political view, it's not a hobby, and it's not camaraderie. Although you can see aspects of all of that in open source. But the great thing with open source, and that's a teaching to everything we human beings do, that nearly every human being is ready to contribute a little bit in order to help him or herself. And that's what open source is based on. It says, we will all contribute a little bit for the greater good, which immediately comes back to ourselves. So it's a self-serving motivation. And this is also what drives many of the web communities we see, where you contribute a little bit, and what you get back is so much bigger because everybody is contributing a little bit. And hence, it isn't charity, it isn't because you're a nice guy, it is because you want the benefit. And we see that there's a new startup called Quora that has questions and answers. You sign up and then you can ask a question and others will answer your questions, and then somehow everybody is smarter. And those who answer questions, they love answering questions because they feel so important and good and they test their own knowledge. And those who ask the questions, they get their answers. So there are many such mechanisms in mankind, and software was just the first area where it was tried out because software developers were the first ones to fully adopt the internet. But as soon as we get other groups doing it, like the baristas or the doctors or whatever, they will start having similar open source-like models and ideas, business models. And so I'm an investor in a company called Local Motors, and they produce cars on an open source principle. So they ask everybody to design some part of the car, then they put it together and create a new model and say, this is the new model. You can buy it for $50,000 and you buy it, and then you get to build it in the microfactory together with the workers. So it's a huge experience for them. And it's possible to produce at such low volumes because of this open source effect. So that's why I think this is more generic. It applies to other things than just software. We can skip this actually, it's too... well, it's just too specific to open source, and we have many things to discuss today. But then this is the landscape of open source software, where there are two types of success. There's the installed base and the downloads, that all open source projects are always happy to talk about. And then there's the commercial success, which many times doesn't emerge. And it's funny, every time I talk to the people from Apache Software Foundation, Justin Ehrenkrantz now is the president, I say, so what's your goal with Apache? And he says, world domination. I say, wow, how much is that in revenues? And my eyes start blinking. And they say, 0. So Apache Software Foundation is a funny open source project in that, first of all, it didn't mimic any old product. It created a new product category called web servers, which didn't exist before. So they were innovators of a new thing. And secondly, they have no ambition to make any money. And nobody is making any money. There were companies who were trying to commercialize Apache, and all of them failed in that attempt. So it's a good example showing that you can have open source that is completely free of commercial aspects, and it can thrive and be leading edge. It's a dominant web server in the world. It probably is the most successful open source project ever. But at the same time, it's a scary reminder that just because you're successful with your community and your users and your install base, you don't necessarily have a revenue stream. And I think Google has sort of seen it with YouTube. They thought YouTube would be a driver of huge revenue, and YouTube is enormously popular, but still it doesn't really drive enormous revenues. So they're still trying to figure out how to make money on it. That's what I believe. I don't know the numbers, but that's what it seems like. So in open source, you have those who have huge installed bases and no money. You have those who have huge money and no open source installed base. Well, Microsoft is a good example because they don't produce open source software. That's why I put them there. And then you have very few who have managed to get both. So Red Hat with a clear business model, MySQL with a clear business model, and Firefox through a separate business model. Firefox as a browser is completely free and open source. There's no business in the browser, but just because they have the search toolbar representing primarily Google, they get, is it now 80 million a year from Google. That's a business model. But it's dangerous to be dependent on just one customer. So this shows how difficult it can be to figure the whole path out. And then of course, let's also remember that with open source, 90% of all the projects are down there, meaning have very small installed bases and very small business around them. And that's fine. This is the evolutionary power of open source. It's a Darwinistic system where you have thousands or hundreds of thousands of attempts and very few actually succeed. And that's what happens in evolution as well. Lots of mutations happening and very few of them are useful and will continue to live on. But they do, and then we get different species, and fish look like fish and they know how to swim, and human beings look like human beings. Because there were so many attempts where every single attempt may have been stupid and simple and silly, but with the massive volume of it, some of them were bound to succeed. And this is why last time I was here I said, I hope some of you will fail. And any specific person I'll talk to, I will wish you all the success. But if this group is to produce massive global success, it will also by definition produce massive disasters. There will be companies going out of business, bankruptcies. Some entrepreneurs will burn out because it was too tough for them, and some of them are here now. But I say don't worry, because if with the right entrepreneurial attitude you can come back and you come back and come back. And I came back 7 times before I really succeeded with MySQL. And of the 6 previous ones, 1 went bankrupt, 1 went out of business, 2 were acquired, and 2 are stable but non-growing businesses today. There's a question.
Well, they're all in Finland or in the US already?
They were all in Finland. So I lived in Finland all the time until I moved to the US with MySQL. We had one company, the one that went bankrupt, Match on Sports, where we launched the service in the UK. But it was a Finnish company and headquarters was in Finnish. And that was an example of fail fast, scale fast. Well, at least fail fast. Because it took us just 18 months to start the company and drive it into bankruptcy. Which sort of is great, because we tested it quickly, and then when it didn't work, it didn't work. And sure, money was lost there, but not too much time. Because the worst thing to see is a slow no, slow demise. When you go back and somebody is working on the same startup for 15 years, and it's going nowhere. Then you might ask, why didn't you stop 10 years ago and start something new? And sort of wash out the old experiences and start anew. And that's what we should allow each other to do. But Finnish society isn't open to that, so you need to support each other in doing it. So if somebody here fails, you need to support the person, you need to give the person cash so that he will survive, you need to celebrate and bring him or her back into life. There's a good example in Denmark, Mårten who was an investor in Skype, and he was just magnificently successful. And I met him 10 years ago, and he was always in the bar drinking the most expensive champagne and whiskey. He's really a great guy. And now I connected with him last year again. He was in personal bankruptcy. He had to borrow money from his friends to just get by. And now he said he's getting out of bankruptcy declaration in May of this year. But he showed how you come back and you sort of put it behind you, and you believe in yourself, and you get help from your friends. And then you come back and you can do it again.
We are going to have a National Fail Day sometime next fall. When was it? Over here, where we celebrate all the failed entrepreneurs. So please all, you're welcome here. Let's have a party on those ones who have really tried.
Can I organize it?
Yes, absolutely. So we will send you the dates. That was in November or something.
And the really great investors, when they see somebody has failed, they think, aha, this person has burnt his fingers. He knows. He knows how to avoid it. He knows what it takes. He knows how bad it feels. So that wasn't really about open source here, but it was a suitable topic to bring up anyhow. So back to the whole business model, because that's what I promised to talk to you about. My own learning in open source is that there are two types of people. There are those who are ready to spend any amount of time in order to save money. And mostly they are students. They'll walk to Helsinki just to save the few euros in a bus ticket. And then there are others, at some point you become people who spend money to save time. You say, what the heck, I'll take a taxi, I can afford it. And it's the same people doing the same things. It might be even the same person in different times of his or her life or career, but it's a difference in behavior. And I think it applies to anything we do in life. For us at MySQL, it was very obvious. Facebook was a clear example. Mark Zuckerberg had grown up on the LAMP stack. He coded everything himself. He would never have asked for any help from us. He just Googled the answers to any MySQL problems. And many years into Facebook's operations, they didn't pay MySQL a dime. But then at one point they said, okay, we have other priorities, we have tons of money here, we are not constrained by money anymore, we are constrained by opportunity and time and doing new things. So why don't we offload this work to MySQL? And they switched from being one who spends time to save money to one who spends money to save time. And that distinguishes the free riders from the paying ones. For any given company, it will mean different conclusions. So Microsoft, for instance, gives away a lot of development tools free of charge, but then they charge for deployment tools. And it's the same principle, because they know that the developers will never pay, but they will influence the buying decision. And again, those who are in the IT operations, they don't care about paying, because they want something safe and secure. And I think you can see the same in whatever business model you have here, whether it's, let me check here, whether it's the brain thing here, and where I'm sure you have some who you just need to, get as your users and others who will pay you money. So maybe the kids are the ones who will spend time, and the parents are the ones who will spend money, maybe. And Marcus had one of the energy efficiency, where there could be the same thing, that some are there to spend time and just use it and create the momentum and create credibility, and others will pay money, and so on with the other pitches that you made. But here's then the problem. When you say, okay, there are some people who will use it free of charge and some will pay, then you have to create for those who pay a compelling reason to buy. This is a term you find in every textbook. What is the compelling reason to buy? I can tell you, customers really need it. When we went with MySQL to paying customers, said, why don't you buy this subscription? It's really great. And they said, okay, what do I get? We said, well, you get the MySQL subscription. And then said, what do I get that the free riders don't get? We said, that's a nasty question. But that's what they asked. You must give them a compelling reason to buy, something that forces them to buy and that makes them feel good about paying money when others are using it free of charge. So you must have it. Well, then when you implement one in the open source world, that can be exactly the same mechanism that becomes a compelling reason to abandon for somebody who's just using it. So a way to screw up the MySQL business would be to have such a nasty business model that it would scare away the whole user community. And if there's no user community, there is no business. So you must keep the balance between the two. And this was explained to me by another person early on. He said that it's similar to the notion of what kind of concerts you can conduct in a church. You can have a concert there, you can charge some cover fee or a ticket fee for people listening to it, but the concert has to follow certain sort of rules of conduct. It's great if it's classical music or a choir or something, but the more it becomes hard rock or something, metal, the more difficult it is to justify doing it in a church. And the same with the price. If the price is too high, the church would say, no, this is against our principle. But if it's a modest one, it's okay. So you have a very fine balance on where you draw the line as to what do you pay for, how much do you pay, and what is in the and making sure it's not in too much of a conflict with the other parts. And we see it ourselves in, say, Facebook. You're on the Facebook page and they have those ads on the right-hand side. And they annoy me. So I'm thinking, if there are more ads on that right-hand side, I'll stop using Facebook. And if I stop using Facebook and 300 million other people do it, then Facebook has no business. On the other hand, if they don't show any ads, they have no business. So where do you draw the line of how much is tolerable by those who don't pay? Or how do you manage it? I wouldn't mind if places like Facebook would tell me, pay us $10 and we will never show you an ad again. I will happily pay it. I would even pay more. But then I'm in that mode where I'm ready to pay to save my time. And to me, it takes time to watch those annoying ads. But it's the same thinking that you must be very fine about the business model. And if you make a wrong step, you can correct it, but you have to correct it quickly. So if you launch something new and there's a big storm around it, your community may take you places where you don't want to go. So you have to react very quickly and say, we stick to this, or we retract, or we change it. And you see it specifically with companies like Facebook, how they have to be very careful with their privacy policy and their settings. And when they change them, they have to be very careful in how they communicate it to the world. Because if they would lose 50 million users overnight, it would be a big, big blow to their business. So it's a similar balancing act that they are doing. So if there's no community, does it matter that the source is open? That's a rhetorical question. No, it doesn't. By which I'm saying that if you do something in a freemium model or an open source model, you must have a community. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. So doing open source software but not having free users doesn't make sense. Having a community site without having any free service for your users doesn't make sense. Because the purpose of that is to get momentum, is to get the help from them, is to get the feedback from them. All of those good things that help you prepare the commercial product for your paying customers. So specifically in open source software, people talk about contributors, and you need a community because they contribute code. And to me, the world is too much focused on the actual code being contributed. It's great if somebody contributes code, but there's so much other stuff that you can contribute, and so many other things that will help your business. So I listed some on this slide. And to me, all of these are great contributions. If somebody writes a really angry blog posting about MySQL when I was there, or now about Eucalyptus, sure, I'm angry and upset that somebody's criticizing my product, but when I get over that, I think, any publicity is good publicity. And the thing is, when somebody really attacks you, you also find out who your real friends are, because they will step up and defend you. And they will defend you more the more you're being attacked. So there are many ways to contribute to the success of something, and you just want a lot of buzz, a lot of discussion, a lot of topics going on here. And this is what Facebook understands so well. This is what Apple understands so well with their product launches. They can launch anything, and people are lining up to buy it hours and hours in advance. And this is also what Salesforce does with Mark Benioff. How to be always a discussion topic, always on the mind of people. And whether they don't notice it even, but they become predicated to the branding, and they become more likely to buy the product and to endorse it. And this is why in open source and in anything community-oriented, it's so important to have a massive install base, because you can be run over by somebody else otherwise. Again, in the MySQL case, many times Postgres was technically the better product, but they never stood a chance business-wise. Because whenever that happened, we had 10 times more users, 10 times more partners, 10 times more everything. So it just became overwhelming to convince the world that here was a better product. Maybe it was less popular, but it's better. And when you start arguing like that with your user base or your customers, you're lost already. Every little hurdle for the customer, every new question takes away a big chunk of your business. So this is something I really had to tell myself many times at MySQL. When people are complaining, just calm down and think they are just loving your product. They're trying very hard to love your product, and you must show them love in return, because that's what they're looking for. So if they criticize your product, never criticize back, never get defensive, never go silent. There's just one way to deal with it, and we can all learn it from our mothers, I think. Kids scream and yell and complain, but mothers are always, at least sort of in a hypothetical sense, mothers are always there understanding and serving and helpful and welcoming. And that's how you must deal with these massive, massive groups of users, because they behave what you would consider irrationally. I think it is rational, but it seems irrational. And there will be a lot of negative feedback, but when you deal with it in the right way, they will turn into your most ardent supporters. Because they invested a lot of emotions in expressing their anger, and those emotions can be switched over to passion for the product if you know what you're doing. But you must have endless patience, and I mean endless. And we saw this brouhaha now between Apple and Adobe. I don't know if you followed, where one of Adobe's community managers was so upset, so he wrote something really nasty at the end of his blog. And I'm sure he thought like that. I can sympathize with him, but it doesn't serve Adobe to say that. And of course, Apple is not their customer. Apple is a difficult partner and competitor, but just you must never lose your composure, never lose your ability to just bring in the feedback, because it's useful. So in open source business, now we're specifically on open source again, there are practically two different,
Sorry, still about the Adobe and Apple. Since my question is like, since it's just so huge fight, isn't maybe doing a criticism open, isn't a good thing, so they actually get more people on their side?
Yes, but if I were advising Adobe, I would say, okay, let's be smart. How do we make Apple not look evil, but look stupid? In some friendly, nice way, so that we are not seen as desperate. Because the moment you use strong words, you are desperate. And when people know you're desperate, they know there's a reason for your desperation. Maybe Apple is right. So that's why I would never recommend it to anybody. But it's difficult, because you're sitting there shaking, physically shaking, and you're so angry. And then you tell yourself to not send the email right now. But even 10 minutes later when you go back, you still think you should say those words. But you still shouldn't. You should just think that, okay, let's just be cool, say yes, thank you, we're listening, this is great feedback. Maybe we have done something wrong, maybe we haven't, that's my recommendation.
But this is only in business, not in personal life.
Actually, this is in personal life too, but I'm not here to advise you on your
Okay.
personal life. And I'm not so sure I am that good in my personal life. You must ask those close to me what they say. But I think I've learned from them a few things. Yeah, yes, let's take more questions.
Just side note, there's actually medical research that's saying that if you vent your anger, like beating a sack or something like that, it's actually going to raise your blood pressure, and you are consequently subject to more of these bursts of anger than if you just cool down and take some few relaxed breaths and sort of try to cool down.
Yes, that's right. So you shouldn't feed your anger, but you also shouldn't just shut it, put a lid on it, because then it won't go away. So I think the real way to deal with your own anger is to acknowledge it and observe it and let it exist for a while, so that you then can politely ask it to leave your body. And I mean it. You laugh now, but I really mean it. Because if you just say, okay, I'm not angry, then it will stay there, and you will be angry for many, many days. And if you try some very aggressive sport, maybe it will help you, but it may just build up more anger or more ability to become angry. But if you observe yourself and say, okay, I'm really upset now, my hands are shaking, I feel intimidated and offended, and my pride is hurt, but then you sort of identify it, then you can slowly push it to the side and say, okay, this is just my own problem, and it's all in my power to not be angry. There was a comment or a question.
I have some question regarding the community. How do you make the community grow, and how you motivate them to come?
So how do you make the community grow? I don't know on a generic level, because I've done it so few times, but I think it's about providing immediate value. There's this ironical joke about, the problem with instant gratification is that it comes too late, meaning people want to be gratified immediately. So at MySQL it meant that we had this 15-minute rule. You had to be able to download, install, and get going with the software in 15 minutes, because we wanted to give instant gratification to them. And all other databases took 2 days to get going. So that's one way. Then we had, among the first open source products, a proper reference manual. So when you run into problems, there was a place to look for the answer. And then we responded to every single email we received, every single email. So we made sure that we really loved them and showed the attention. And they said, hey, I like this. There's some problems, but they respond. There's a reference book. It's so quick to install. I can deinstall. I can install again. We made it easy to get going. So removing the adoption hurdles is very important. And I think we see this with other products who are very successful, that they're so easy to jump into. Like, how difficult is it to set up a Facebook account? Not difficult. The most difficult thing is to find a picture that you are happy with yourself. Because we're also self-centric and we don't like the pictures we have. But that's all. Everything else is easy. So I would really grow the install base by making it very easy and nice to be there. But then you also need some of the coolness factor. You need somebody who's an opinion leader to speak up for you. Because people are followers, and they will look around and say, okay, Christo, he's an opinion leader here. I'll do what he does. I'll wear the same jeans, I'll have the same color socks, because he's a smart guy. So you must have some of those smart guys showing the way so that people feel comfortable going there. And MySQL had those in the beginning, because mp3.com was one of the first users, and then came Yahoo, then came Google, then came Facebook. So we always had a cool company that you could identify with and say, I'm using MySQL because Google does it too. So that helped. There was a question here.
Follow.
Yes.
You spoke mostly just now about getting the user community to grow. What about the developer community? The question is actually, how important was it for MySQL to have the developer community grow? Was that a priority?
So was it important to have a developer community? It was, but back to my previous slide, it was important but not super important, because there were so many other ways to interact, and developing the software, developing the lines of code is just one small part of making a software product successful. So in the grand scheme of things, sure, we had good software contributions, but we had many others as well, and we didn't see software contributions as some holy grail. Practically what we did is we hired all the contributors. So Mark Matthews, who developed the most phenomenal JDBC driver, we hired him and we paid him money to get ownership of the driver. We put it in the product and there it was. So the best contributors tended to get hired by us. And now in retrospect, people look at it and say, MySQL, you didn't have so many contributors. And the answer is no, because we hired many of them. At the end, we had 150 engineers. So we had hired a number of them. And also that we focused on having contributors in all aspects. Commercial partners, non-commercial partners, universities, governments, users, bloggers, book authors, and so on. And the code was one group there, but just one out of many. And it has to do with the product as well. Linux as an operating system consists of 2,000 relatively independent modules that you can develop and switch in and switch out as you wish. A database engine is a solid, monolithical engine with very strict requirements on consistency within the code. So the hurdle to become a contributor is much higher. It's not impossible, because Postgres does have many, many more contributors than MySQL has. So sure, you can do it. We just didn't feel that it was the most important thing. Serving Google was very important, and they contributed code back. And then it was difficult to bring it into the product because they had developed it for their own purposes. So that it was important to manage relationships like those. Here's a question.
It's a difficult one.
Pardon?
What is the difference, in your opinion, between confident or too confident and delusional? For example, have you had challenges, or, for example, you knew that MySQL will work, and did you have difficulties to explain it to your customers or to your partners or to anyone that, hey, this is going to work, but if they ask how, when, explain.
Yeah.
So this is the point where I'm stuck now.
That's an excellent question. So a question about confident versus delusional, and how do you know which one you are? Are you overconfident or are you delusional? It reminds me of what I spoke about last time, this Stockdale paradox. Admiral Stockdale, who was a prisoner of war, who reminded himself every day that he mustn't be over-optimistic about being released, because he might not be released. But at the same time, he must never give up faith that one day he will be released. And to me, it translates into business in the same way, that you must be able to live with the uncertainty of today and still have certainty about tomorrow, without knowing how to get there. And it's a difficult thing, because at MySQL there were moments where people looked and said, this won't work. There's no way this company will make money, or there's no way it will recover from Oracle acquiring this InnoDB thing, or whatever it was. And I always stood there saying, it will work. At the end of the day, it will work. It will be hard work, but one day it will work out. And not everybody believed me, and some of them left the company because they thought that it wouldn't work. But some stayed there, sort of holding their hands and thinking, okay, let's take a risk. And at the end, it did work out. But you never know for sure.
I have a related question. How
Yeah.
did you motivate your partners or the people who are working with you? How did you, or did you have to? That's the thing.
Oh yes, I think a leader always has to motivate his or her group, absolutely. It's one of the key tasks of any leader, the CEO or any leader in the organization. You must keep your team at its best fighting power, and part of that is motivating them. But there are many ways of motivating. Some people motivate silently, some people do it overtly, some are very charismatic, some are not. You can motivate in many ways, but you must do it. So you must provide, but motivation is not about, some wonderful speaker who comes in with, saying some wonderful things. Motivation is about purpose, showing that there's purpose in what you do, and it is providing value, and it makes sense. And when it makes sense, you are rewarded. So it's actually very practical, operational stuff, and not this wishy-washy dancing and singing and, you know, kumbaya and, oh, life is great. Sure, you can do that too, but motivation is an everyday thing. You know, why do I do this? Okay, because it makes sense, and I like my colleagues, and our customers actually are happy. So just repeating good customer feedback is a way of motivating your people. Repeating bad customer feedback is also a way of motivating. And as a leader, you must know how to, in what proportions to use them. You know, when your team is feeling really great, you can give them all the shitty feedback. And when your team is not feeling so great, then you have to be a little bit softer with them and give them more of the positive feedback, maybe. Okay, we'll go back to this boring business model discussion then, but you can disrupt me in this at any time. So, like in many businesses, you can either be a disruptor of the old or you can be a creator of the new. And open source is known for being a disruptor of the old, meaning rebuilding something that was already built and then disrupting it. But there are examples like Apache, Eucalyptus, the Neo4j database, and other things which are completely new products, building new markets on an open source model. So open source lends itself to both of those in my mind. Could I ask for some more of this wonderful drink? Nice.
With or without vodka?
Yeah, I like the vodka part. So I'm just a huge friend of Darwin as it applies in my mind to business. And not that evolution necessarily is the best way to develop business, but I think it's the best way that human beings can learn. And he said that it's not the strongest guys who survive, not the most intelligent, but the ones most responsive to change. And this is very important for a place like Finland, because we are so small. In the last 15 years, well, let me first start by saying that to me Finland is and Scandinavia is the place for the middle class. You know, this is the perfect mediocrity in the world. Everybody is middle class. There's a small upper class, but it's so small, and there's practically no lower class and really few poor people, but a huge middle class. And that's what our strength is. It's a mediocrity, and we can do new things. But in the last 15 years, the world the middle class of the world has grown by 1 billion people. 1 billion have moved from poor to middle class. So Finland, which used to be a tiny country, is now an even tinier country. You know, of the world's middle class people, maybe we used to represent 0.5%. Now we may represent half of half. It's a big change. And there's no self-justification for our success anymore. And we see it all over the place. You know, in the Olympics in Paris in 1932 or something, when was it? Summer Olympics. Which country scored third in medals? Finland. And in 1952 we held the Summer Olympics. But from now on, do you think Finland will ever host the Summer Olympics anymore? Do you think we will ever score any medals, gold medals in the Summer Olympics anymore? No. We're so few. And there's 1 billion more people in the middle class, and they are the ones who become athletes and businessmen and so on. They'll just wash us out. It doesn't matter how good we are, because there's so many of all the rest. And people don't really realize it here. We think that we have some justification because we have a nation and a flag and a constitution and blah, blah, blah. But we're just a tiny, shadowy corner of the earth, and we are shrinking. So that's why I go back to this rule and say, luckily, it's not the strongest or the smartest who will survive. Because probably the strongest are somewhere else, and probably the smartest are somewhere else as well. But it's the ones who can learn the fastest. Those are the ones who will win. So it's not the Chinese just because there are so many, or the people of India because there are so many. It's the ones who are learning the fastest. Well, now the scary thing is that it is the Indians and the Chinese who are learning the fastest. but sort of we don't need to give that to them. So if we can adapt very, very fast, then we can win despite our tiny, tiny size. But other than that, otherwise it won't work. It's just, we're just a rounding error. Even when we do our best, even when we have the best grades in school and we graduate with the highest degrees, it still isn't enough. But luckily then, if we are fast at adopting, we can make it happen. And this applies in business as well. Very quickly you need to realize what's happening and change your course if needed. There was a question.
I think it has to do with the attitude. Like post-war era in Finland, we had the attitude to become something. Now the Chinese and the Indians have the attitude to become something. So I think that's the key. We have to get the attitude.
Yeah, but in Finland we have Nokia complacency. We think we are somebody just because Nokia was successful.
That's the problem.
So I look forward to the day when Nokia isn't successful anymore. It will put some pressure on you guys. Not that I want Nokia anything bad. I hope that they will, and I think they will be successful for a long time. But it's really that's an important part. The complacency, the notion that we are fine and we are smart and we are a liberal democracy and we have the best banking system in the world. So what? We need to do even more and faster. And that translates into business and into open source, where there's so much unknown today. But if you can learn fast and experiment, that's how you build your business. And look at companies like Google. What do? They experiment every day. How many beta projects of Google can you name? There are tons of them. And they just launch them. No marketing or anything. They launch lots of projects and then they see how they succeed. And then they pull back some of them, most of them, and proceed with some of them. And it's a very powerful method in the modern world. So sometimes people ask me, so what are the keys to success? And the sad answer is there are no keys to success. There's so many things that need to be right for success. But I have this basic principle, which I think I've learned in my life, is that no matter how bad a situation is, there are always more than one path to success. So I'm not just saying that there's always a path to success, I'm saying there's always more than one path to success. So I refuse to agree to a situation where there are no choices. I think we always have choices, and I think we always have choices which are choices between two successful scenarios. Then there also are millions of ways of failing. So if there are maybe 2 or 3 ways to success, there could be 3 million roads that lead to failure. But still there always are ways that take you to success. And you need to get many, many things right for success to happen. And at that point, it isn't just one secret. People ask, what's the secret of success of Nokia? And there is no answer to it, exactly because there were so many contributing factors, or any successful company. What's the secret of success of Apple? Is it Steve Jobs? No. Of course, it's him as well, but there are many other things that they did right. But then if you fail, there are also many reasons why you fail. And specifically in open source, a big reason is that you are not number one in your category. And I'm going back to this notion that the world is now online and the world is flat. You have a tougher job than I had when I was a student, in that you have to become number one in a global category very quickly. And not all categories are global, some of them are restricted. Like my favorite Finnish website, Muslim, serves the Muslim community, and of course it's global, but it's not every human being on the planet. They've limited it to one group. And you can limit it in that way, but still it's a much more massive scale than before. And that's why you have to learn so fast, because you're sitting here in Finland, whether you grew up here or not, you're sitting here in Finland now, and whatever you do, you will have competitors who are so far away that you've never heard of them or seen them until they suddenly appear. So becoming the leader of your category is very important. And this is what drove MySQL to success. We're always the number one open source database. And Linux over BSD, and many other similar examples. And then, a typical entrepreneurial problem, not solving a valuable enough problem. We have all these fantastic software developers in the world, who love to develop software for their own needs, to scratch their own itch. That's great because they develop great software. But it also means that they all develop file systems and databases and operating systems because that's what they love. But now the situation is the world needs different software. So if you can bridge the gap between your own personal passion and what the market actually needs, you may find a much better business model or business area. There are many very, very attractive markets where nobody has created the software yet. And one reason it hasn't been created is that software developers tend to gyrate to what they love and what they care about and what they learned about in college. But there are many other challenges that have huge businesses opening up for them. So, my final slide here, I would like to go into discussions, is just to show to you that free and open source software thinking is spreading elsewhere already. And I told you about Local Motors, producers of cars on an open source method. And today I again learned about AudioDraft. Is that correct? AudioDraft, doing it with music. Rec a Movie, doing it with movies. Birdstyle does sewing patterns on an open source method, so you can download and share the patterns freely. Kaching does it for investors, investor information. Factual does it with information. Shares it, takes information from people and shares it with everybody, and so on. So it's showing that the open source idea is spreading into other parts of the industry and other parts of business. And that will open new business opportunities for you, where it doesn't have to be an open source software company, it can be a new company with similar ideas. And I don't even know all these things. You probably know them much better than I do, because you are tuned into this world and this industry. So with that, let me stop here and start questions and answers. And there's my email address if you want to communicate with me. And I must tell you, I have to leave exactly at 4. Sometimes when I stop and I walk out, people want to talk to me about all kinds of very important projects. Today, I unfortunately won't have time for that, so you will have to send me an email if you have some important thing to me. And now, how do we go through the questions? I think you were first, and then we have you back there. Yeah, go ahead.
How did you recognize what the opportunity was, the business opportunity within MySQL, and then generate a business model based around that open source idea? I don't really know the full story behind that.
That's a good question. How did I identify the business opportunity with MySQL? I must admit I am so stupid that I can't really take credit for it. Because when I joined MySQL, there was a business model called dual licensing. And I said, this looks great, I can grow it. So I started growing the business around the dual licensing model. Sure, I went through it in lots of detail and I became an expert of it, but I hadn't invented it. And then I hired a management team and they worked with me, and at one point one of my managers said, Mårten, this dual licensing model won't scale forever. We need a new business model to take us to the next step. And I said, what do you mean? And then we started discussing and I agreed with him, and that's how we developed the subscription model, which we modeled from Red Hat. But again, it wasn't really my idea, but it was my colleague Zach Urlocker who came up with it and said, we must go after this. And sure, there were others who had similar ideas, so it's not just one person we should credit, but that's how I did it, and maybe my strength was an ability to listen to others and be open to the changes. Because many CEOs would just have been going on the one business model or would just have changed it. But I think we learned to be plastic in our thinking, meaning open to input and changing our path as we went on. We made lots of mistakes, but we always had revenues to fuel our growth. And the end result was that we used very little venture money. So the total capitalization of the company was $36 million. And that's not much for a company ultimately worth $1 billion and more. So we had, and that's thanks to the business model. If it takes a long time for you to figure out your business model, you need to raise more and more capital, and then you become heavily burdened by the VC money you brought in. So that's why I always tell startups to go out and find some revenues, because customer money is always more valuable than VC money.
So the business model is based on subscription? And
Today,
I guess that's by
yes.
businesses who want to have support for MySQL or maybe some sort of interactivity with the development team?
So the subscription model actually is a package that has many different components, and any given customer may like a different part of it. And many of them come to us and say, oh, we don't want the subscription, we just want technical support, or we just want the monitoring tool. But we're very clear on saying, no, this is an indivisible product. You are on our subscription or you are not. You have access to all of this, you don't need to use it, but you have access to all of it or none of it. And not all of them liked us, and some of our competitors started selling individual components, but we still felt that the only way to grow fast was to have one product to sell to everybody. So it's sort of, you go to McDonald's and all they sell is a Big Mac meal. You can't buy the hamburger separately. And maybe one day they will go to it because there's too much hassle in figuring it out otherwise. So that was our strategy, to just stick to it. And we had in the subscription, we had legal indemnity, we had certified binaries, we had prioritized bug fixes, we had technical support, we had priority technical support, we had access to our best consultants, we had a monitoring tool that you wouldn't otherwise get, and things like that.
How long did it take to turn the business around, though, to go from a company which wasn't really generating profit to based on a subscription model?
Well, we didn't turn it around, it's just that we continued to develop the dual licensing business, but it started plateauing, so it still generated revenue, but not much new, and there were different customers to whom we sold the subscription. So it was, building on top of it rather than turning around. But we made the decision in 2004, launched it in 2005, and it was 2006 and 2007 before it really started taking off. So 3 years. Okay, and there we had a question.
Unrelated. Would you and the audience like to see some more pictures after this?
Would I like to see more pitches? Absolutely. Should I stop? Tell me when I should stop so that there's time for the pitches. I need to leave at 4, but...
You can go in 10 minutes and then we'll have some pitches.
Okay, yeah, I love the pitches. I can give feedback on the pitches as well if you want. I'm not sure you want.
You all want a pitch?
So who was next? Was it you?
Yeah, I'm sure.
We'll decide that it was you, and then it's you.
Great talk. My question is now, like every startup today needs to be like the Facebook, the Google, right? So these 37 Signals guys and this great group, we work, and they say like we're not going for Fortune 500 but Fortune 5 million, and like our profits per employee are maybe higher than even like with Salesforce. So how do you it's like obviously not every startup has potential to be a Facebook, and maybe they shouldn't be, but they can actually not be a hobby business, but they'll be a profitable business. So how do you categorize that? Or what's your take on this?
It's a great question. I think it goes back to knowing yourself. So I don't think it's a question, is this a company that can be a Google or not? I think, what kind of person are you? And once you learn what kind of person you are, you should join or start such a company. And I've learned over time, I've tried all kinds of companies, so I was a slow learner, but by now I know that personally I love those that go for the biggest thing, even at the expense of many other things. Even at the expense of time, it will take a much longer time to develop them. I'll lose much more power because there needs to be more investors. But I love to try to build those global big companies. And whether I succeed or not, I don't know. But then there are other people who say, no, I don't want to do that. I want a very profitable, smaller scale company. For instance, it's known that in organizational dynamics, 150 is a very important limit. Once you have more than 150 people, you can't know each other as well as you know under 150, because over tens of thousands of years, human beings have lived in villages of 150 or less. So somebody may say, I'm ready to run a business up to 150 people, but not bigger. And that's fine. And there's so many models. I mean, even down to a hairdresser who says, I'm a hairdresser, I'm myself, I may hire one more person. That's great business as well. I think all of those are wonderful businesses, and we need to know where our best passion and fit is. When I talk about business, I happen to talk about the high growth global ones. That's my passion. So you need to filter my talk and know that that's where I'm heading.
Yeah, I was just seeing that there's so much cult of this going for the stars and like just, I mean, it's not that people are delusional that it shouldn't be, but just like reflecting and actually like if you have a business that you own more and that make less money, but like your net worth in the end is better off than just.
Yeah, it's all about what your goal is. My goal is not net worth. My goal is the great feeling of having impact, positive impact in the world. And then there's also the notion that whatever goal you set, you should set it a little bit higher. And Michelangelo said it so well, where he said, the greatest risk is not that we set our goals too high and fail to achieve them. The greatest risk is we set them so low that we do achieve them. So you need to take yourself out of your own comfort zone somewhere. And the Americans say, aim for the stars and land on the moon.
And they did. Right?
And they did, yes. I'm not sure they aimed for the stars, but you have, and like they say about the alchemists, that as they looked for gold, they found many other important metals. So that's why I think it's fine to have this delusional belief in what you can do. And if you end up doing a little bit less, that's fine. Because the problem is that 99% of the world's population has none of that. And of those 99%, many are there to stop you from achieving what you want. They work for the tax authorities or they give you parking tickets or whatever. Bureaucrats, they are there to stop you. So I think therefore it's sort of a special cherished group, the ones who are ready to break their own comfort zone and throw themselves out there and do something that nobody expected that could be done, because it's such an amazing feeling. And people do it in sports and arts and elsewhere. So why shouldn't we do it in business? There, yes, and then I'll sweep over here.
Thanks for the inspiration presentation, Mårten. A question that is not directly a startup question, more related to open source and community. Is it always a startup company that is successful in launching an open source or community-based business? Or have you seen, can you remember any case where an incumbent company with existing business model is able to change to an open source player or a community player?
It's a great question, but I think we should generalize it and say, has a big company ever launched a new innovative thing? And say, sure, some have. I mean, it happens, but it doesn't happen often. And then specifically in open source, SAP acquired Adabas D from Software AG, and they open sourced it at SAPDB. It didn't go anywhere. They came to us and paid us money to do it for them, and we did it as MaxDB, and we grew their install base by 10x. So there you see how it actually worked and how money bought community indirectly, but it did. Mozilla, let's remember, Firefox is a spin-off from Netscape. It was the Netscape browser. The team said, hey, we can't let it die, let's open source it. So not really corporately driven, but from a corporation. Nokia is now open sourced Symbian. Let's see where that goes. Nokia and Intel is doing the Go? Yeah. Me too. Whatever, which I think is a great thing. Google has launched Android. That's a success. Microsoft has this component for installation procedures for open source products called Wix, which is successful. A very, very small piece of software, but still. So sure, there are examples. But are they big businesses? No. But how many have built big open source businesses at all? Not too many. Yet. I promised to sweep over to this side, so I'll skip you for the moment and go here. Yeah, you're next.
Can you
and I need to take the people in the back rows as well.
Can you give some advice for the exit phase? So how do you actually handle the exit phase when, for example, Sun wants to buy your company?
So how do we handle the exit phase? So I happen to have a slightly naive and sort of optimistic view that you shouldn't plan for your exit. That if you do a good job, good things will happen. And for MySQL, we always were targeting it going public. We prepared for the IPO. We had the S1 document written. We had a ticker symbol ready for NASDAQ. And that's, of course, when you do that, that's when you become even more attractive. So it's sort of, that's what made us attractive. And then the fact that there were other companies trying to buy us. So that was important, to show those who wanted to buy us that we are not falling into their arms immediately, that we're not dependent on it, that we could really say thank you but no thank you a few times. Because many entrepreneurs are actually not risk takers. So it's different. MySQL had a hired gun. I was not a founder of MySQL, so to me it was easier to be the risk taker, saying no, we're not selling. But founders, I've found, have difficulties doing this. People think they are big risk takers, but they aren't. They've risked everything on starting the business, and then they want to risk nothing more. And that's why we see many young startups being acquired when the CEO is the founder. Because they sit there saying, wow, I'll have 20 million in cash if I sell now. I'll have no risks, no worries. I don't have to hire a CEO, hired gun who will just be a nuisance to me or whatever. And somehow they then end up selling sooner than the others. So it's important to have this integrity, independence, say we have a business, we are continuing on our own. It's also important to have respectful relationships with those. So if somebody wants to buy you, don't start kissing and hugging them, but also don't push them away. So, deal with it as a business matter, saying thank you, we are honored that you're interested in us, and we agree that we have a great business, and how smart aren't you for realizing this, and let's have a discussion. But at the same time, sort of keeping them, showing that you're not dependent on it. And then once we said, okay, it's time to really get into this, we had professionals helping us. So we had a Credit Suisse negotiating for us, we had lawyers ready with all the paperwork. So we were very professional in the acquisition process, and they had nothing to complain about. Sure, they had complaints about the business or something, but every document was ready, everything was clean. So they knew that they didn't deal with some really hairy, nasty issue with all kinds of unresolved problems, but it was a well-managed entity. And and then it's important, if you really get into a negotiation, it could be good to have somebody else negotiate for you. Because you don't know what your business is worth, and you don't necessarily have the guts, but the bankers do. They can, negotiate up your price more than probably you can yourself. So, I don't know. But we really didn't plan for exit that way. We were thinking we would work many, many more years as a public company, suffering at times with also being successful. Okay, was there anybody in the background? No? Well, then, what did you?
Thanks. You talked a lot about failure. I like that as a topic. Fail fast is one of my favorite topics as well. Is there something, have you experienced a failure in your past that would have taught you a lot that you're kind of deploying now?
Me, failures? What makes you think so?
No, I mean, you always learn. So
of course.
What kind of learnings would you?
I'm laughing because I have failures every single day.
Me too.
So, big one was Match on Sports, which went bankrupt. I had left the company already, but it went bankrupt 6 months after me, and many people think it was my bankruptcy. And I learned from that. I learned from people I didn't hire more. I learned from people I should have fired, but I didn't. And I go back and say, why did I? How could I be so stupid? Why didn't I force myself to take action? Why did I let it happen? People warned me, people told me, I was aware of it. Why didn't I do anything? So the biggest self-accusations are usually of inactions, not actions. When you do something, you go back and say, okay, it was really stupid what I did, but hey, I did something, and usually you can live with that. But things you didn't do, those are really difficult to live with. And that's where I'm promising myself now that, and I won't discuss all of them with you here, but I have some sort of internal promises. Mårten, never again do this. If this situation happens, then you take action immediately, and then you do this, and then you do that, because I'm not ready to fall into those traps.
If I comment on that,
yes.
It's very valuable, because I think one of the biggest mistakes startup do, especially if it's your first startup, you try to overanalyze the situation, and you try to be on top of everything and understand everything. And that leads to inaction, because you can't make a decision, you can't commit. And that is really a big problem for most startups.
I agree, and I can say I've seen open source startups that I've, thought the world of, and they've had great entrepreneurs as starters, and they've said something like, we are going to be the biggest in the world in this segment. And now, 10 years later, they aren't. And I'm thinking, why didn't it happen? And I think there's instances where they didn't commit, they didn't go all in. They should have said, okay, now I need to live up to this thing I promised to Mårten. Not that they promised to me, but that they said. Because they go out and say, I'll do this, but then they fail to take the action, fail to hire the people, move the company, change the product, change the business model. And it's a hard path, especially for a founder who is typically too much in love with the original creation when it has to evolve. Sorry, are we?
One more.
Okay, so you're saying that we should create companies that grows globally and then it scales, but based on consumer behavior. If you want to do something on the internet or even mobiles, you should give something for free. So, which one would you think is better? So, if you have a product, if you're doing a service, should you make it open source, or should you keep the code closed and give it for free, like the freemium model, or just free for the user? So you get user base.
I don't think there's a generic answer. I think you must delight some users and make it very easy for them to experience the delight. How you do it is up to you. I don't think there's any religion in open source. Most successful companies are non-open source companies. Some of the successful ones are open source. So open source is a great and strong mechanism, but it's not universal. But it's such a... All these questions then are boiled down to your specific company and your customers and yourself. So it's difficult to give a blanket answer.
Thank you very much for a great inspiration.